Go ahead and call to order the joint meeting of CIO interview subcommittee. And I would also note that there's been a replacement in the subcommittee for Teresa Tello, which is David Miller. So with that, I'll ask that the roll call. Ms. Hopper, please.
Henry Jones.
Here.
Lisa Middleton.
Present.
David Miller.
Present.
Stacy Oliveris. Stacy Oliveris. Irena Ortega.
Here.
Betty Yee.
Here.
And I didn't hear any volume on Stacy.
She said she's here.
Okay, I'll go ahead and mark her, Mr. President.
Okay. Okay, good. Okay, so then the next order of business is the information agenda item.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Is that you, Stacy?
Yes, the microphone had issues. Sorry.
Okay, good. Okay, yeah. And I also like to note that Board Member Perez is on and would like to acknowledge if there are any other board members participating in this part of the agenda. So if you could just note that you're on, we could acknowledge that you're here. Otherwise, we will move on. So with that, I will now turn over the meeting to discuss the process and panel member roles for Chief Investment Officer interviews. Michelle Tucker, please.
Thank you, President Jones. This is Michelle Tucker, CalPERS team member. Nice to be with you all today. I appreciate the opportunity to review the CalPERS CIO interview process and roles. And so I think we have the Board Services Unit who is going to display the PowerPoint. Thank you. Next slide, please. So to set the foundation, this is just really to highlight that this is a civil service position. And so the recruitment and the selection process must follow the merit-based processes and rules and laws set forward by the SCB and CalHR. And this ensures a fair and consistent process that's equitable to all candidates. Next slide, please. These four parties that you see highlighted on the screen are the four groups that will be working together to ensure success. And in the next slides, we'll be going through the role of each of these groups. Next slide, please. CalPERS' CEO, Ms. Frost, is the hiring manager and the interview panel lead. She's responsible for facilitating the interview process. At the onset of the interviews, Ms. Frost will review key criteria being sought and certain things that you may want to listen for during the interview process. She'll assign the panel members the questions that they will ask, and Ms. Frost, the designated board members, and the designated CalPERS executive team member comprise the interview panel. The interview panel has a key responsibility to fairly and consistently assess all candidates to determine the most qualified candidate to fill the position. CalPERS Human Resources oversees, provides guidance on, and ensures all merit-based and required processes are followed to assure a fair process right up to the final candidate selection. And then finally, the role of the executive search firm, Korn Ferry, was to identify a pool of diverse and highly qualified candidates who most closely match the desired qualifications and recommend who should be interviewed. Along the way, Korn Ferry has provided insight on each candidate's ability to successfully fill the role. And they'll also be present to observe the interview process and provide any additional insights to support the final candidate selection. Next slide, please. So the responsibilities of the interview panel, we're going to go a little bit deeper here. This slide will provide a little more detail on the responsibilities of the panel. In fulfilling these responsibilities, you play a key role in establishing compliance with the merit-based civil service process, which is critical to the recruitment of any civil service job. So first, confidentiality. It is imperative that all panel members maintain complete confidentiality regarding candidates and outcomes. This is not only a requirement, it also protects the candidates who then can determine for themselves when best to tell their current employer that they are in the recruitment process for the CalPERS CIO position. Next, appropriate questions. Since you only have a limited time with each candidate, we want to make sure that we use the same structured questions for each candidate. There will be 90 minutes per interview. We have 10 structured questions that all candidates will be asked. This will establish consistency and gives all candidates the opportunity to share specific information about the same topics. Follow-up questions, if asked, should be relevant to the structured questions and the candidate's responses. So the follow-up questions are really to gain clarity or further or deeper understanding of a response. And we should avoid entirely new questions which veer or steer away from the conversation at hand. Questions are designed for the panel to assert an understanding of each candidate's investment expertise, leadership strengths, and personal and professional attributes. In addition to these questions, Ms. Frost will spend a few minutes on opening comments and introducing panel members. At the end, the candidate will be allowed a few minutes to add more information or ask questions. So that will leave approximately 75 minutes for the questions and responses, so between 10 and 15 minutes per question. So we recommend that you kind of keep an eye on the time and keep that in mind as the interview moves along. In a minute, I'll talk about how to get the most out of that time. So then the last responsibility of the interview panel is to document observations and assign ratings. So taking notes during the interview process is critical, and you should use the templates that were provided to you for that. At the end of this presentation, we're going to pop up the template and kind of walk you through it. Notes do not need to be taken verbatim, but they should concisely capture key information to summarize candidate responses and highlight key observations. And so this should include notes indicating where a candidate may have failed to mention something important. Notes should stick to observations and related to their responses and avoid statements that include personal attributes or personal judgment on those attributes. So complete the document by assigning a rating for the response to each question. So let's go to the next slide and go over the ratings. To expand a bit more on the ratings, we've displayed them here. These are ratings and descriptions that are included in your interview template. So for each candidate on each page, you will see these listed out on the top. Based on your assessment of a candidate's response to each question, you'll select the appropriate rating. All of your ratings will be added together for a final individual score, and then all panel member scores will be averaged for a final score for each candidate. Next slide, please. The next two slides detail a bit more about what you can expect during the actual interview process of each candidate. So you were provided with a schedule and your materials, and you can see that each interview is scheduled for 90 minutes. It's important to stay within that 90-minute time frame so that all candidates are provided equal time, and this is part of ensuring merit and consistency. As the interview panel lead, Ms. Frost will initiate introductions, and then each panel member will provide a brief introduction of themselves. And this portion is really to put the candidate at ease, and it should just last a few minutes as the bulk of the time will be dedicated to the interview and the candidate response time. Just before the questions are asked, Ms. Frost will walk through a script to provide an overview of the interview process for the candidate so they know what to expect. Panel members will then rotate, each asking one or more of the structured questions. Once the candidate provides their response, panel members may gain additional clarity with follow-up questions related to the original question. Once all structured questions have been asked and responded to, the candidate will be given an open opportunity to provide any additional information and/or ask questions that they may have. Next slide, please. At the conclusion of each interview, there will be a brief break before the next interview so the panel can have a short discussion regarding the candidate and capture any additional thoughts regarding the candidate and discuss the ratings. A rating may be assigned at this time or later if time does not permit. At the end of each day, we will have a debrief for the panel to have additional discussion and to capture the individual scores for each of the candidates that are interviewed. Next slide, please. Now we'll review some tips on getting the most out of the interview time, which, as we mentioned earlier, is, even though it's 90 minutes, it will go quickly and it's limited, especially considering all of the information you're trying to gather and assess. The key takeaway from this slide is that the panel is there to listen and the candidate is there to talk. So the candidate should really be talking about 80% of the time. The panel should probe deeper where needed by asking relevant questions for clarity or more information. If there are any points of confusion or uncertainty in the candidate's application package, you can absolutely use some of that time to get clarity around that. As a panel member, you should feel comfortable allowing times of silence so the candidate can formulate their thoughts. Often candidates need a few minutes to reflect to be sure of what they're going to say, so it's fine to allow a few moments of quiet. While we would avoid interruptions, it's certainly okay to slow a candidate down when you need it or even interject if you're having trouble hearing them. Most of all, keep in mind the candidate is there to showcase the competencies and the skills they possess, and so we recommend that you allow them to thoroughly answer a question before moving on to the follow-up question. Next slide. Next, we want to highlight a few common biases that can occur during an interview process. By being aware of these biases, you can mitigate their occurrence. The affinity bias can occur when you determine a commonality. So it might be something like having the same alma mater, belonging to the same association, having a friend in common, or having a similar background. This bias can establish preference for a certain candidate. A confirmation bias occurs when you form an early perception based on something the candidate says or does. And then as the interview continues, you might look for, seek out, or focus on additional information to support that initial belief. This can prevent you from assessing the candidate fully and should be avoided. The halo and horns bias occurs when a candidate highlights something the panel member perceives as highly positive or highly negative, and then overlooks any subsequent alternate indicators because they remain focused on the very positive or the very negative thing. This can keep you from really hearing and properly assessing anything that occurs after the positive or the negative occurrence. And last, recency bias. And this can occur since our brains are wired to remember things presented to them most recently. So when we come to scoring, this can come up. So to avoid recency bias, take good notes so that when you refer back to them, your memory is refreshed in such a way that you can assess each candidate equally. Next slide, please. So these are the materials that the interview panel and the candidate received to support a smooth process. You received from Korn Ferry the candidate profiles and competency grid, and these really provide foundational information for an advanced understanding of each candidate's experience. These documents may assist you in formulating appropriate follow-up questions, so you may see something in that packet that you want to ask about more deeply at the end. The instructions and helpful tips are provided to support the smooth process, and then the interview questions and the notes document with ratings is a really critical part of the materials provided. As I mentioned earlier, this is where you'll capture your observations and ratings, and these documents must be completed and submitted to HR at the end of the first round of interviews, and if applicable, after the second round as well. So just one more slide. The next slide, please. After the second round of interviews, I think I skipped ahead, but after the second round of interviews, the final candidate will be selected and given a conditional job offer. So then we'll go through a very thorough background check before a final offer is extended. Once the final candidate is cleared for hire, there will be an opportunity for the full board to meet the candidate. So now we'll quickly share our screen to review how the document that you will be using to record your interview and observations will be accessed. And so Karen Van Amerongen from the HR team will go over that. So Karen, I'll turn it to you.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to go over this document to help you navigate through it when you're getting ready to use it later for each candidate. And as Michelle indicated, it's definitely a critical component of the final recruitment file. And these are the instructions that will help you take and save electronic notes so that you can submit them at the conclusion of all of the interviews. If you've instead chosen to take handwritten notes, then you'll need to have a hard copy of each of the templates with you. But for the electronic note taking, you would open the appropriate candidate template at the onset of each interview. And by now, it would probably be helpful if you've already saved those perhaps to your desktop so that you have easy access when it's time to get to the interview. Then once opened, you'll see at the top here, the templates that you were provided, they've been pre-populated with your own name as well as the candidate name for each interview. So you'll just want to double check and make sure that you are taking notes on the correct template as you open that. Then, of course, the templates that you've received, they will have the questions inserted here. And what you'll do is start taking notes by just clicking in this section here. We've got it all set up so you can just type notes as needed. And it would be recommended that you may want to periodically hit save. So either using save up here if you have it on your shortcut, or going to click on file and then save so that you're continuing to save your notes as you go along and you don't have to go back and remember them later. So for each template that you'll receive, you'll be able to scroll through. Once question number 1 is done, you'll be able to scroll down and see question 2 on the next page, and that will go forward all the way through the last question. So once you've taken all of your notes, you'll make sure you do a final save. And then when you're ready to score each of those responses, you'll be able to click over here right into this box and record your rating, again, from those descriptions that Michelle talked about earlier and had on the slide, which are also listed on each page here. After all of the interviews are done and through the second round, everybody will be provided instructions on how to submit your final notes documents with the ratings. So unless you have questions about this document, I will move it back over to Michelle.
Okay, I see no questions in the chat.
I have a question, Henry.
David?
Okay, so if we, I'm really concerned about my clerical and typing skills are abysmal. There's no way I can keep up in an interview typing and listening and trying to do the Zoom at one time. So if I can get these printed out, how then would I then need to transcribe them, or would I hand in written ones? I just arrived in my office this morning before this, and so I haven't had a chance to even try to figure out how to download them to a desktop or get them printed somewhere here in Chambers.
Thank you for that question, Mr. Miller, and that would be fine. That would be an alternate way. You could certainly print them out and then scan them and send them to me and to Karen at the end of the interview process.
And David, we'll have someone print out those questions for you. I'm here on site. I can print them out. Okay.
Yeah, I'm kind of a caveman when it comes to the technology.
Karen, if you'd like to forward those to me, this is David, the host. I can print those out for David and give them to him.
Great. Yes. I think you're down in board chambers anyway, David. So thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Will do.
Okay, Ms. Milton?
I think David pretty much asked my question, except I'm not there in Sacramento for you to print them out for me. But I much prefer working from paper than trying to respond electronically. So if someone could work with me and my assistant to make sure that I get them in paper offline, I would appreciate it.
Certainly, we'll do that.
Okay, Ms. Oliveris? Ms. Oliveris? Are you muted? Ms. Oliveris? We can't hear you. David, she says her microphone is not working. So could you work with her while we go on with Ms. Yee? And we'll come back to you, Ms. Oliveris. Okay, Ms. Yee.
Thank you,
Absolutely.
Mr. Jones. I just wanted to state for the record, I will be doing my ratings on paper as well, and we'll be scanning and sending them over.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Yee.
Okay. And when it's my turn, I will be using paper also. So any luck, Mr. Miller?
I'm not sure who would be best to answer this, but in terms of the questions, in terms of actually rating the answers to the questions, I'd like to have a little bit more of an understanding of how the actual responses they give in the interviews relate versus the written materials. For example, if there is something that is a key qualification or ability or skill or experience mentioned in the written materials, and they don't mention it in their questioning, do we use that information that we know, or do we need to ask a follow-up question? In other words, are we giving them the ratings strictly based on their responses to the questions, or do we take that additional information and knowledge we have and bring that to bear on our ratings?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Miller. So the interview process is one component of the overall selection. There's other elements as well, such as the background check. What I would recommend that we do in this case is that you ask the follow-up questions related to their background if you don't find that to be forthcoming in the questions. But one of the things that can happen that can lead to a lack of consistency is if we apply our knowledge to their responses and give them a higher rating, and we don't do that consistently. So it's probably best just to ask a follow-up question during the responses.
Yeah, because I've been familiar with a lot of interview models where if they don't say it, it doesn't go into the ratings, regardless of what may have been in their resume or CV or prospectus. So just wanted to be sure on that.
Yeah, the real key is just to do it consistently. So as long as we consistently, ask those same types of follow-up questions, then that should be sufficient and fine.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Tucker, you see Ms. Oliveira's question there? If you could answer it.
I would say that the interview notes, I would just submit it after the overall first round. We certainly can receive them on a full basis each day, but if you'd prefer to just kind of scan them all at the end of this first week, that would be fine too. Does that answer your question, Ms. Oliveira?
Go like this. There you go. All right. Oh, this should know.
That means mostly.
Mostly. Okay, is that what it is? Okay. Okay. I'm adjusted to that too. Okay. At the end of the day or end of the week?
I would say you could do them all at the end of the week. So we have interviews scheduled for a couple of days this week. So I think after all of the first round interviews, you could submit them all then.
Okay.
I think the main goal I would recommend would be that you finalize your own ratings each day when we do have the debrief. That way it's still fresh in your mind. And then you can look back at the end of the week and scan it all in.
Okay, good. Okay, Ms. Tucker, I see no additional questions from the committee members. So Ms. Frost?
Thank you, President Jones. I don't have anything further to add for this open session.
Okay. Okay, well then I see no additional questions from committee members. I will now entertain any requests to speak from public members. And for that, I'll call on Mr. Fox. Are there any individuals from the public who wish to speak at this time?
Yes, President Jones, there are no call-in members to the call-in studio, so therefore our work is completed.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And so this will conclude the open session. Is the question? Did I hear someone? Yeah, who is that?
Can you hear it? Stacy, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Stacy, now. You have an additional question?
No.
Okay. Well, I hope they can hear you because they will be moving into closed session in a minute. So it's good that you're now able to communicate. So with this, we will adjourn this open session meeting and then go into a closed session for the panel 1 committee members. So thank you again and good luck and thank you all.